Welcome to the RealTime Fantasy Sports Show. I'm Jeff Power, senior writer with RealTime Fantasy Sports, joined once again by Logan Glaser of RealTime Fantasy Sports. Logan, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jeff.
Logan, it's week 16, if you can believe that. We're in the playoffs for every league out there. It's Christmas. It's a crazy weekend. There's games throughout the weekend. It's going to be exciting times in fantasy land, in my opinion.
Yeah, this sets up really well for a great sports weekend along with Christmas, as you mentioned. We got 3 Christmas games on Monday, along with a full slate or 5 games with NBA. So should be a
Yep,
very entertaining day.
exactly. And also with Christmas, I don't remember ever a year where there's been so much around Christmas. Maybe it's been in the past it's been like that, but I can't ever remember a season where there's been a whole slate of games on Christmas Eve, and then we have 3 games on Christmas. It's going to make the holidays a little tough for me, at least,
For
because I'm
sure,
going to
there's going to
definitely
be a
be paying
lot going
attention.
on along
Yeah,
with family time. We got semifinals in most leagues, week 2 with the TFC. So lots going on.
yeah. We always go to Christmas Eve mass at 4 o'clock our time here, Central Time, and I mean, that's right in the middle of the games. It's at 3 o'clock. There's games going on. I don't know what I'm going to do. This is rough.
Yeah, and we also got some Saturday games as well. So
Yep.
if
There's
23rd with
Saturday
that. So
games. There's a game tonight. The game tonight's not the best though. That is the Saints and Rams, and then the game
there
on
are a couple of fantasy players though in that game. We got
that's
Cooper
true.
Kupp, Stafford, Kamara. So there are a couple of players, but I do think the Rams win that game tonight.
I
Even
agree.
though there are only 4-point favorites, last I saw. So
Really,
yeah, I'd like them to cover on that.
they've been playing pretty well lately, the Rams, and like you said, there's definitely some fantasy players that are going to be involved in this game, especially for the Rams. Even the Saints, Olave's back this week, so he's kind of intriguing. Kamara's been playing well. Kyron Williams is a must start. Nakua, Cup, even Stafford, he's been playing really well. I think he's a fine start this week. He's at home. There's a lot of QBs hurt. He's in my top 10 for QBs this week.
Yeah, for sure.
And then we also have, like you mentioned, 2 games Saturday, Bengals, Steelers, Bills, Chargers. Again, some fantasy players involved there. Then a huge slate Sunday. And then Monday on Christmas, there are 3 games, Raiders, Chiefs, Giants, Eagles, Ravens, 49ers. And
Yeah,
those
there's a
Monday
lot of
games,
actually stars in those games. Lots of QBs I think will be going off in teams lineups. I mean, you got Lamar, Patrick Mahomes, Brock Purdy, who might win MVP with that.
yep,
So lots of different options for QB.
for sure. And this weekend, we're doing something here at Real Time Fantasy Sports we like to do throughout the season. It's our Super Shootout. We're doing a Christmas edition. So the Super Shootout is a slate of games, and you pick a lineup of 8 players. It consists of a quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 receivers, tight ends, a defense, and a kicker. And it's just the Christmas Day game. So you pick from those teams only, and you pick 2 players from. You can pick 2 players from each team. You can't pick more than 2. It's just $10 to enter, $1,000 for the grand prize. Pays out 30 winners. Sells out every time we put it up, right, Logan? And we just put
Yep.
up this morning, and I think it's already, what was it, like 10% sold out last time I looked.
Yeah, usually it sells out within about 24 to 48 hours. It's one that will for sure sell out, and it's sells out pretty quickly, especially with this one being on a Christmas day, a big slate, lots of good teams on that slate as well.
If you
Yeah,
want to,
you'll want to make sure you get in it today
yeah,
if you're
it's on all the
interested.
league homepages right now, rtsports.com. You can click on the Money League link. It's on there as well, but it's on your homepages too. And also, so Logan and I, we thought it'd be fun to do a lineup for this Super Shootout. So we're going to go over that here shortly. We're going to give you players that we thought we would play in this format. And you can pick our brain if you want and use something similar in your lineups. There's all sorts of different options, like you mentioned, just $10 to enter, chance to win $1,000, rtsports.com /Christmas if you want to look at our lineups. And you can also get to the contest from that page as well. So if you want to sign up from there. And then also, Logan and I, we thought we're not going to go over all the games because we're going to do the Super Shootout first, and it's going to take up some time, but we're going to give you 5 players we really like this week and 5 players we're kind of fading this week as well. And then, as always, if you have any questions at all throughout the stream, if you want to ask us lineup questions, questions, even off-season stuff at this point, if you're not in the playoffs. Logan and I are happy to answer anything you might have. We always get a lot of good feedback from people throughout the streams. Always a lot of fun getting your questions. So if you have anything at all, feel free to put that in the chat there. Logan and I will be happy to answer that. So Logan, let's talk about this Super Shootout contest again. We are going to give you our lineups here in a second, but it's just $10 to enter. Again, you pick a lineup from 8 players. You cannot pick more than 2 players from a team, and it's just the Christmas Day games this year. So we're calling our Christmas Shootout. What is your strategy kind of when you're doing this?
Yeah, I want to get some stars in, but I also want to be a little bit unique with my lineup. I want to target a QB and wide receiver on the same team. So if they go off, then you stack with those 2 players. So I think that is a must for me when I'm looking at this lineup. So I'm going to go with like a unique play with that I don't think it will be very highly owned with that, but has the potential to be a top scorer. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. I want to kind of mix and match with, you gotta have to have your studs in there, like Christian McCaffrey. I think he's going to be a must play.
Yeah.
So you do want to have some studs in there, but you also want to throw a couple of players that might be a little bit lower owned. And that's kind of what I did with my lineup.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think it's good to have little things a little different than some of the other owners. But for this week, for me, it was harder to do that just because there were so many good players available, in my opinion. Like you could pick a host of superstars because there's so many good teams playing. I mean, you have the Ravens, the Chiefs, even the Raiders have some good players available. The
49ers, best team
49ers.
in the NFL.
Yeah, exactly. 49ers, Eagles. You have 4 of the best offenses in football. So makes it a little harder to differentiate, but for the most part, I try to do that as well with a couple of my picks. So Ernie, if you could bring up the screen of our picks here, I'd appreciate that. So here are our picks. I will let Logan go first, and you can tell everybody your choices and why you picked them. And
Yeah.
go ahead.
So at quarterback, I went with Lamar Jackson. Running backs, Christian McCaffrey. Other running back, DeAndre Swift. Then Travis Kelce, AJ Brown, Flowers, Chiefs defense, and then Moody as my kicker with that. So I've got the stack of Lamar Jackson and Zay Flowers. So that was my Baltimore stack, which I think Flowers will be very low owned. My
Sure.
guess is that he should be below 5% with how good of core these wide receivers and tight ends will be on this slate. So I think he'll be very low owned. So if Flowers is the highest wide receiver on the slate paired with Jackson, I think I've got a good chance with that lineup. So it's definitely taking a risk on that. And then also I got Christian McCaffrey at running back. I think he'll be 80% owned with that. And then Swift, who has really struggled recently. So I think he will be a little bit more low owned. He's had a couple of games straight below 10 points, but I like him to rebound. He's got a great matchup this week against the Giants. So I like him in there. Also paired him with AJ Brown for Eagles with that. I expect them to put up 30 plus points on the Giants this week. So I think they will be a very high scoring offense. And then I got Travis Kelce. Again, he's got a great matchup as well. There's a couple of teams that have really good matchups with all these top offenses with that. And then I've got the Chiefs defense going up against the Raiders, and then Jake Moody as my kicker against Baltimore.
Yeah, so we don't have a lot in common. We do have some in common. I thought it
Yeah,
could
we've
be
got
more.
2 or 3 players. I think
Yeah.
2 players.
We have 3, I think. We have the
3.
Chiefs defense, AJ Brown, and Christian McCaffrey. I actually
Yeah.
think McCaffrey might be on 95% of the teams.
He definitely could be. Yeah, if you're the one of the 5% that don't have him, it's really just if he gets hurt in the first quarter, then you're looking really good.
Yeah,
But if he's playing a whole game, you might be in trouble.
yeah, if you want to differentiate yourself, I think that's one aspect I would not do. I would not differentiate by not taking Christian McCaffrey personally. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I looked it up. I was doing some research for my articles this week, and he has more. I think it's roughly about 100 points more than the second place running back. That's absolutely crazy.
Wow.
100 points. He's scoring like an elite fantasy quarterback. His numbers are as good as the top quarterbacks this year, and he's a running back.
He's exactly up 100 points on Raheem Mostert, which is wild. And Mostert has 1 million touchdowns this season. So
it's unbelievable to me the season McCaffrey's having. I mean, I'm anxious to see how we always do an article at the end of the year with most owned on championship teams. I have a feeling as long as he doesn't lay an egg the next couple weeks, he's going to be on a ton of championship teams. I mean, that's just a huge differentiate a different number compared to the second running back. It's like
Yeah.
7 points a game. So it's like a touchdown more than the second running back advantage you have over the rest of your league. So unless you really screwed up the rest of your draft, I mean, you're doing well if you have
Yeah,
McCaffrey.
he's averaging 25.5 fantasy points a game. His worst fantasy game this year is 14.5 points, which is
I always say if they hit 20 points, it's a great game. If you hit 20 fantasy points and you're a running back, it's a really good game. And he's averaging 25 a game.
yeah.
Oh,
Last
God.
week he had 41, and that wasn't even his highest on the year. He had a 48 on week 4 against Arizona.
I was talking about this with my son, though, but I know he's going to be the number one pick next year. But do you worry a little bit about next year, about his workload? I mean, he's getting older. He's been
I
unbelievable. But I worry about that a little bit.
Yeah, I can definitely be worrisome, but it feels like every year with the number 1 pick, there's an injury.
It's true.
It's happened the last several years because McCaffrey has always been the number 1 pick until this year, for at least for the last 3 or 4 years, and then we had Justin Jefferson be the number 1 guy this year, and he went down to the IR, so it's
It's
definitely
the
worrisome, though, with McCaffrey getting a little bit older, but I still think he has another good season left before he starts to go down that decline.
yeah,
Right.
especially in that offense too. It's the new Madden curse, the fantasy being the fantasy number one player.
Yeah.
That's the new curse. I hate to say it. All right, I'll go into my lineup now. Enough talk about Christian McCaffrey and how great he is. So my QB is Jalen Hurts. I actually have him ranked second overall in my rankings this week. I know he didn't even throw for 150 yards last week, but even with that said, he still scored over 25 fantasy points. He ran for 82 yards, scored 2 rushing touchdowns. He has at least 2 rushing touchdowns 3 of 5 games. So his work on the ground just gives him a huge fantasy floor. And I think this is a great make right game against the Eagles. Like you said, I think they could score 30 plus points in this game against the Giants, I should say. I think I just said the Eagles, but I think it's a really good make right game for him this week.
The
So I really
Eagles
like
always seem to fall down on the 1-yard line. It feels like every
yeah.
single game he's getting a QB sneak inside the 1.
Well, last week he could have got another one, and Kelsey
Yeah,
got called for that false start. I didn't
yeah.
really realize what he did until I listened to his podcast. Did you hear the reason they called it?
How he moved the ball up a couple
Yeah,
inches before.
exactly.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen that called like that, but that was why it was called. So at the time, I thought, "What the heck's going on? Why did they get a false start called?" But that's definitely the reason that he got called there. So I like Hurts a lot this week. I like Christian McCaffrey as well, just for all the reasons I mentioned. He's going to have a monster year, and he's had just a must start in my opinion. And here's where I differentiate a little bit. Josh Jacobs is my pick right now. I don't know if he's going to play at this point. I think he will. They were on a short week last week. I don't think this injury is too serious. He's dealing with a quad injury, but if he plays, I like his chances to get a lot of work against the Chiefs as they try to keep them off the field, their high-powered offense. So that's where I kind of differentiate a little bit. I think Jacobs has a high ceiling. He was posting some pretty good numbers before his injury as well. So I like him to get a lot of work in that matchup. Chiefs are good against the pass as well. So I think he could do well there. And then I have Deebo Samuel, who's been unbelievable receiver of late. He has 20 plus fantasy points, 4 straight games. Just been a monster. He has multiple touchdowns, 3 straight games. I just think he's going to have another great game this week in a very high scoring matchup against the Ravens. My next pick is AJ Brown. That's where I get my connection. You kind of mentioned that, Logan, where you want that 1-2 punch. And AJ Brown's the best receiver for the Eagles, in my opinion. I know his numbers have been a little down lately. Last week, he had just 10.6 fantasy points, but he had double-digit targets. He has double-digit targets 3 straight games, so he's still getting a ton of work. He hasn't scored, so that's kind of hurt his ceiling a little bit the last few weeks. He was really piling on the touchdowns earlier in the year, but I think he'll find the end zone this week. I like that 1-2 punch with Jalen Hurts. And then I have Rashee Rice at my other receiver tight end spot. Again, another guy who's just been tremendous lately. He's really emerged as that top target in the Chiefs offense. He has at least 7 receptions, 4 straight games, 20 plus fantasy points, 2 of those games. So Rice is posting some really big numbers. He's finally that number 1 guy in the passing game at receiver for the Chiefs. They finally have that guy to replace Tyreek Hill. He's not Tyreek Hill, obviously, but Rice has been really good, and I like him a lot there this week. And then I have the Chiefs defense, as you do. I think that's actually the best matchup for all the defenses. Maybe the Eagles might have a better matchup against the Giants, but I like the Chiefs against a rookie quarterback at home. So I think they've been playing good defensively as well, put up some fantasy points there. And then I have Justin Tucker as my kicker. Just looking at a team, I didn't want to use two players that, from a high-powered team and waste a kicker on, that spot. But I had a spot left with Baltimore, so I went with Tucker and what I think is going to be a high-scoring game there. So there's our super shootout lineups. You can see them. It's going to be a link here. You can see it on the screen there. It's rtsports.com/Christmas. So you can get to the lineups, the contest from there as well. Again, it's just $10 to enter. It sells out every time we put it up quickly. It's already what was it, Logan? 20% sold out?
Yeah, it's somewhere around there. Let's see. Yeah, 15% sold out with that, and it just
15% sold
opened
out
up an hour
an
ago.
hour. Yeah. Put it up an hour. It's already 15% sold out. Great contest. 8 players from the Christmas Day games. It'll make Christmas even more enjoyable to watch. So there's our lineups for that. You can take advantage of that and definitely put our knowledge to use if you want, or you can differentiate and do whatever you want. We won't be offended, right, Logan?
For sure.
All right, so let's talk about the games now this week. So crucial week of games. We're going to give you 5 of our favorite plays and 5 of our fades, guys we think might not do so well. So I'll let you go, Logan, first. Who's your first guy you really like this week?
Yeah, my first play is going to be Baker Mayfield. So
I
Mayfield
like
had a
that.
great week last week. He had 34 fantasy points against Green Bay, and he's coming in with a great matchup this week against Jacksonville, who's really struggling defense. It's a big game for both teams. Playoff implications on the line for both sides. You got 7-7 versus 8-6. Jacksonville's both sides are fighting for first place in their division and the wild card spot, so it makes it an even bigger game. But last week he had 4 touchdowns, 381 yards, and that offense has been rolling. Evans has been leading the way, but Godwin had a great week last week. Rashid White has also been looking really good out of receptions out of the backfield. So I really like Mayfield this week against Jacksonville.
Yeah, I have Mayfield ranked 9th. I think that's the highest I've had him ranked all season. He's coming off a 4-touchdown game, 3 touchdown games, 2 straight. I think he's a good play as well. Again, a lot of QBs hurt. There's a
Yeah.
lot of guys hurt. So you're going to have to start different players. I mean, even guys like Nick Mullins and Jake Browning and Joe Flacco. I think they're all decent plays this week. Never thought you'd want to do that in the playoffs, but sometimes you got to do things that are unconventional to win. I remember winning a year once. I started Tyler Thigpen in my championship game and won. Remember him? Played with the
Oh
Tennessee
yeah.
Titans.
Yeah, that feels like years ago.
Yeah, he had a couple huge games at the end of the season, but Tyler Thigpen won me a fantasy championship one year. So crazy things can happen. All right, my first hot play, Logan, is another QB, and that's Josh Allen. So obviously, you want to start him every week, but I think some people might be scared after last week. He didn't even throw for 100 yards in that game last week. So some people might think, oh, they're going to be run heavy team now for now on. They have a new person calling plays in Buffalo, but don't fear. Allen still scored 17.1 fantasy points in that game. I think it's more of an outlier. They're going to throw the ball. Game script really dictated that against a good Cowboys defense. They found a hole in it, exploited it, ran all over them. I think they throw a lot this week against Los Angeles Chargers. They've allowed the 4th most fantasy points of quarterbacks this year. They were torched by Aiden O'Connell last week. He scored 4 touchdowns in that game. So if Aiden O'Connell can score 4 touchdowns, what's Josh Allen going to do? I think he's going to have a huge game. He's a must start. I actually have him ranked 1st overall this week in my rankings. I think he's going to have a huge game. Don't be scared with him throwing for fewer than 100 yards last week. All right, Logan, who's your next player that you're targeting this week?
Yeah, next player is going to be T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase went down with an injury, and who is probably going to be out for the next 2 weeks or so.
Mhm.
And T. Higgins has really slid up to that number one option. He did drop a couple passes early, but he made it up for it in that game against Minnesota. He had 22 fantasy points, 61 yards, 2 touchdowns. And he goes against Pittsburgh this week on Saturday, and their secondary did not look good against the Colts. Um, we've always been talking about how Pittsburgh defense has kept them in games, but they have really struggled again with injuries, with that in that secondary. And this is another huge game for both the Bengals and the Steelers. I think whoever loses this might be out of it, just because Bengals are behind on the tiebreaker with that. So they would need some help if they do lose this game to get into the playoffs. But Higgins will go up into that number one wide receiver role in Cincinnati, and I think they'll just keep rolling with Jake Browning at quarterback.
Yeah, Browning's been good, so I'm not too scared of the Bengals receivers. With him throwing the ball to him, he's been producing. He's no Joe Burrow, but still, those numbers have been good for him, and has not been much of a fade at all with that receiving game because of Browning as the QB. All right, my next hot play that I really like this week is Trey McBride with the Arizona Cardinals. I don't think there's many tight ends I'm starting over him right now, maybe just a handful. I think he's a must start. He's been fabulous. He's 8th overall in fantasy tight end scoring. Remember, he did not start to begin the season. So he's 8th overall in fantasy tight end scoring without being a starter to open the year. He's 4th his last 3 games. He has at least 7 receptions, 3 straight games in 4 of his last 5. Tied a season high with 10 catches last week. It was his second 100-yard game of the season last week as well. He gets the Bears this week. They allow the 3rd most fantasy points to tight ends, 26th overall against the pass. So I think McBride's set up for a really big showing in week 16. If you have him, I'm playing him. He's an elite option. He's a top option at passing game. Marquise Brown is hurt as well. He might not play. That just gives more targets to McBride, who's kind of uncoverable right now, which is a little bit surprising. Didn't do much his rookie season, but man, he looks
Oh yeah,
absolutely tremendous right now.
yep, for sure.
All right, Logan, who's your next hot play for the week?
Yeah, third one is going to go Raheem Mostert. I think he's going to be one of the top running backs this week. He has 20 touchdowns on the season, and he goes against Dallas. And we saw last week James Cook just ran all over Dallas, and they really struggled to stop that run. So I think sets up as a great game for him. I think it's going to be high scoring back and forth. I do think it's a close game. I believe the point spread is 1. Miami, I believe, is favored by 1 point, with that being at home. But Mostert has 20 touchdowns on the season. Again, this is going to be a very high scoring game. I believe the over under is at 51, with that game. So lots of points are going to be scored in this game, and I'm going to go with the guy that's leading running backs and touchdowns, with Raheem Mostert at 20.
Yeah, get your fantasy players involved in this game. Should be a tremendous game. I think it's a prove it game for both these teams
It
because
is. Both teams
Dolphins
have
have not.
beat up on the bad teams, but they've
Yep.
struggled against the good teams.
Cowboys have been terrible on the road. Dolphins have not beaten anybody that's good. So it's kind of a make or break team and also make or break game for both these teams. And Dolphins, unfortunately, have a lot of injuries they're dealing with, though. That's one thing that does concern me with them winning this game. But I think one thing that's overlooked with Mostert, too, not to, before I move on, though, but he gets a lot of volume. He has 20 plus carries 3 of his last 5 games. I know people are worried Devin a chains there. The rookie's been good, but man, they run the ball a lot in Miami. It's not really as pass heavy as some might think.
Yeah, they sure do, and it's really because they get up, they score so many points, and they're up 3 touchdowns within halftime, and that's kinda
It's
how
true.
they do that. But, yeah, Chain looked electric out of the backfield, but Mostert is still carrying that workload,
Yep, he's still
especially
getting
inside the
carries.
5.
Yeah.
Especially inside the 5, that's a huge part for running backs as well.
For sure. All right. My next hot play is Aaron Jones of the Green Bay Packers. So I've been scared to use him all year just because of his workload and he's been hurt and he hasn't got a lot of touches when he's been active. But he finally returned last week from his knee injury and he got a lot of work. 17 touches in that game, looked just fine, big part of the offense. So I think that's encouraging for the rest of the season. I'm confident to use him again, especially this week against Carolina. They allow the 4th most fantasy points of running backs, 20th overall against the run. I think he could finally pay off for fantasy owners this week. I know it's been a long season if you owned him, but hopefully it's finally going to pay off here in week 16. He has a big game. I think it's definitely in the cards for Jones this week. All right, Logan, who's your next hot play for week 16?
Yeah, next play I'm gonna go with Amari Cooper, and he's kind of a boomer bust guy. But last two games he's gotten a total of 22 targets. He had 14 targets in week 14, 8 last week. He had 109 yards and a touchdown, and he's got a great matchup against Houston in a dome. Don't have to worry about weather with that. And Joe Flacco has just been slinging the ball, as we mentioned on our waiver wire video. Just how many attempts he has. Last week he had 384 passing yards. And Cooper is that number one option in Cleveland. So I really like him to get another game with 10 plus targets. And he has a great matchup against Houston to do that.
At, at least 44 pass attempts, 3 straight games for Flacco.
That's wild.
Throwing the ball a lot.
Would
Comes
never
off.
have guessed that, especially with that offense. I feel like they're really just a ground and pound team. I know
Yep.
Nick Chubb is injured, but still you got Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt. But they have really just turned towards the air with Joe Flacco.
And it's working. So don't want to try to fix something that's not broke, as they say. All right.
Yeah.
Logan, my next one of my favorite plays of the week is Cooper Kupp. He was a little down when he returned from injury the second time, but I think he's returned to must-start territory. He looks really healthy. He's playing as well as he has all year. He's third overall in fantasy receiver scoring his last 3 games. He has scores 3 straight games, 100-yard games, 2 straight games as well. And he did that against the Browns and Ravens in 2 of those games. Those are 2 of the best pass defenses in football. So he's getting it done no matter who he's playing. His route running looks elite once again. They play tonight. I'm starting him in a couple of my leagues. I feel good about him against the Saints, who have played pretty well this year defensively, but I think they can be had at times through the air. So I think Kupp's going to be a really good play this week. I'm not afraid to use him at all, despite that matchup against a decent pass defense. He looks like the old Cooper Kupp, in my opinion.
Yep, sure does.
All right, Logan, who is your last hot play for week 16?
Yeah, my last play is going to be Garrett Wilson, who's another guy that's going to be a boomer bust play. In his last couple of games, he's gone 1, 17, 8, 25. So there's a lot of weeks where I'm kind of questionable if I'm going to start Garrett Wilson just because of that Jets offense. He's got the talent, but just the surrounding parts and putting up points is the scary part. But they have a great matchup this week, home against Washington, who I think has the worst secondary in the NFL. So I think a lot of points are going to be scored by that offense, which is very surprising to say, but I just am very against Washington's defense. So I do think if Zach Wilson plays, that Garrett Wilson is going to be a must start in all of my leagues.
So who would have thought we have 2 Jets on this list? They're the worst
Wild.
offense in football. But I have a Jet for my last one, and it's actually their running back. I guess this matchup is just too good to pass up for both the passing and running game. But I like Breece Hall. I know some people are really down on him after last week. 6 carries for 12 yards. They were blown out in that game, but before that, Hall had double-digit fantasy points 9 straight games. He also had 20-plus fantasy points 4 of those games. So he's been producing really big despite last week. So I'm not getting too down on him. It was a tough matchup, just a great one this week. Like you said, Washington's a disaster. It's a great get-right game for him. I think it's a get-right game for all those players on that side of the ball. Even Tyler Conklin's kind of intriguing, but Washington allows the 6th most fantasy points for running backs this year. They've allowed 150 or more rushing yards 6 times. So I think Breece Hall gets it going. Don't worry about last week. He's going to get it going. His numbers have been really good before that, even in this putrid offense. So I think he's a great play in this matchup. All right, Logan, we got our first question of the week. Start 2 receivers in a flex. This is a tough question. So it's Puka, Devontae Adams, Rashee Rice, and I'm guessing JT's Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah.
So who are you sitting out of those 4? I think you can make a case for all 4.
Yeah, it's very even, I think, across the board. I think if I had to choose, though, I would probably sit Devontae Adams. It's hard for me to say that just because of his name and skill base, but yeah, I think I'm sitting Adams out of those. It does look like JT is going to be playing. He was a full participant in practice. Zach Moss is also still questionable. So if Moss misses that game, then JT's got a good volume.
I think it's between Puka and Devontae Adams. So I actually have Devontae Adams as one of my fades I'm going to talk about here coming up. But Puka scares me too, just because he has 50 or fewer yards, 2 of 4 games. Man, I think it's between him or Adams. I might lean Puka. It's a close call though, because even Adams, even though I have him as a fade this week, he still could get some targets in this game. I just don't expect him to have huge numbers because Kansas City's done a pretty good job shutting down number one receivers this year. So it's a toss up for me between Puka and Devontae Adams. So that's the way I would lean. I think Rice and JT are good starts, but after that, it gets tougher. So that's a tough decision there, TD. Hopefully, you get a lot of TDs this week and you win your game. But good luck in trying to figure that one out. I'm leaning Puka. Logan's leaning Devontae. So that's how we feel there. All right, let's talk about fades now. Guys we don't like that we're kind of scared of this week. I mean, it's not necessarily saying you have to bench them. Like I mentioned, I actually have Devontae Adams on this list, so it's hard to bench him. But these are guys that we think might not have huge games. So give me your first one, Logan.
Yeah, it's a guy that's really struggled the last couple of weeks, and that's Dalton Kincaid. During the middle of the season, he had great games. He had averaged 15 or more in 4 straight games with that, but he's really struggled in the last four. He's gone 10, 8, 7, and 0. Last week, he had 0 yards, 2 targets. Especially Dawson Knox is back, so it takes away a couple of routes that he's running each game with that. Kincaid's still that number one option there, but he's just not getting as many looks as he has in the past in these last couple of weeks, and that does scare me a bit. He does have a great matchup against the Chargers, but also game script where they could easily get up a couple touchdowns early against the Chargers after we saw how the Chargers were last week. But I think it really comes down to if he finds the end zone, and I'm betting that he won't find the end zone against the Chargers this week.
Yeah, I agree. His numbers are going the wrong way, unfortunately. He can't get lower than 0, though. So that trend of going lower
Yeah.
each week is going to be tough this week.
Uh,
Hopefully, he gets a couple catches at least. We'll
for
see.
sure.
I teased it, so I'll lead with Devontae Adams as a player I'm kind of scared of this week. He's having another really good season as a top option in this passing game. He's 13th overall in fantasy receiver scoring, despite having some inconsistent quarterback play throughout the year, but he's still had some pretty good games throughout the year. But he's had some down games too. He has 4 games with fewer than double-digit fantasy points. I think he could struggle a little bit this week against the Chiefs. They do a good job of shutting down that number one receiver, like I mentioned. He had 5 catches for 73 yards against the Chiefs in Week 12. That's not terrible. It's not great though. And if you have better options, I might look at using them this week. I think he could finish with a similar line, 5 catches for 70 yards, something around there, 5 catches for 60 yards. So it's not terrible numbers, but I don't think they're going to be huge numbers. So he kind of scares me a little bit this week. So that's why kind of a tough call for me with that question we had between him and Puka. I think they could actually kind of have similar numbers in the end. So it might not make much of a difference who you end up benching there. All right, Logan, who's another one of your faves for this week?
Yeah, next one is going to be Najee Harris, and he has just really struggled the last couple of weeks. He's gone 4, 15, 9, 7, and 2 in his last 5 weeks. So that Pittsburgh offense is just brutal. Now they're going to
It is.
Mason Rudolph with that. But thought last week, if there was any week that Najee could break out, it would be against Indianapolis's defense with that, and he just got destroyed. He had 12 carries, 33 yards, and also had a fumble with that. So I think Warren's definitely the best running back when you look at that offense with how explosive he is. So I'm going to be fading Najee Harris in most of my leagues. Just the last couple of weeks, I'm off of him now. I can't trust him in my lineup.
We kind of talked about this, I think, in our waiver wire video earlier this week, but I don't know how many teams have used a third string quarterback this year. I think there's
So
at
many.
least 3 or 4. I can't remember a season where that's ever happened. It's absolutely crazy to me. But Mason Rudolph starts for Pittsburgh this week. We'll see what
Yeah.
he can do. Can't be much worse than
Yeah.
Mitchell Trubisky.
We have another QB benching in Atlanta with Desmond Ritter for Taylor Heineke. I think that's actually a good move for that offense,
I do
just
too,
personally. But yeah, so many starting quarterbacks at the beginning of the season. I
for
think
sure.
almost at half the quarterbacks I feel like have either been benched or hurt or backups are in. So
Yeah, and then you got guys like Patrick Mahomes who's actually underperformed for his standards,
oh yeah.
uh, for fantasy teams to use a high pick on him. So just unfortunate. The position's been tough this year. All right, I'll give you another one of my fades, and it's Josh Downs. So he was really good the first half of the season, but he has not done much since. He has not hit double-digit fantasy points since week 8. He does have at least 3 catches 5 straight games, but he's not top 50 yards in any of those games. So while he's getting some looks, he's not doing much with those. And it's just hard for me to trust him right now. I know Michael Pittman's questionable to play. Maybe that might lead to more looks for Downs, but Pittman seems like he's trending to where he might actually be ready. He actually got in some practice yesterday, which is a good sign, even though he took a terrible hit in that game. I'm not sure how he's even standing upright at this
Yeah.
point, but he is still playing. He still has a chance to play this weekend. If that happens, I like Downs even less. But either way, I think he's a big question mark to use this week. Josh Downs, he had a great start this season, but he struggled lately. Falcons have allowed the 4th fewest fantasy points to receivers as well. All right, we got a question on here from Bryce. Full PPR options need to pick 2 running backs and a flex out of Hubbard, Aaron Jones, Kenneth Walker, David Montgomery, and Amari Cooper. Wow.
Yeah, this is a loaded question, I feel
That's
like.
tough.
I think the guy I'm not going to be picking is Hubbard. I think it's between the other 4 for me. I think I'm personally just going to be fading Hubbard out of that. I think those other options are just too elite to pass on. I think you do have to start Kenneth Walker out of that bunch for sure, at least in one of your spots. And then what are
Yeah,
your thoughts on the other ones?
I'm thinking I like Aaron Jones for sure. I mentioned him earlier in the broadcast. I think he's going to have a really good week. I think it's the second spots between Walker and Montgomery. I think Walker might have a higher ceiling, but Montgomery probably has a higher floor. He's just so consistent. I might lean him. And then it comes down to your flex between Montgomery and Cooper. That's another. You talked about Cooper earlier, potential
Yeah,
for the big game. They've been throwing the ball so much. Uh, I don't know. I guess,
which he's looking for ceiling plays. So if you're,
yeah, if you're going for ceiling players, I say go Walker. So I'd go Jones, Walker, and Monty.
yeah, I think I'm the same with that. And then either Dak or Mahomes, which both have actually decent matchups this week. You got Mahomes against Vegas, and then Dak against what should be a very high scoring game against Miami. So I might actually go Dak right there, even
Yeah,
with
I have Dak 5 in my QB rankings and Mahomes 6. So that's like a toss up there. I'd probably lean Dak. I just think that's a higher scoring game. It could be a shootout, so I think he has a higher ceiling. So I like Dak there. And then we both kind of think Jones, Walker, and Montgomery for your other options, two running backs and a flex. So Cooper's tough to sit though. I think he has a high ceiling this week, but those running backs, I trust him more. And even with Cooper looking good, Njoku's getting a ton of looks in those running games as well. So that's the way I think we would lean here. All right, Logan, let's do another fade here before we get to another question. We're finally starting to get some questions coming in here, but who's another one of your fades?
yeah, talked about quarterbacks, and my quarterback that I'm going to be fading is going to be Sam Howell. So Howell actually ranks as the 7th overall fantasy quarterback, and he had an incredible stretch. He went 36, 22, 28, 23, 21, 21, and he was really reliable up until last weekend. I thought had a great matchup too against the Rams, but he went 11 for 26, 100 yards, 1 touchdown, had an interception. With that, he actually leads the NFL in interceptions with 15 with that, even though he ranks as the 7th overall fantasy quarterback. So he's actually great for fantasy with that, but he does struggle with turnovers with that. But he goes up against the Jets this week at the Jets. I think they have a good defense. I think they really keep Washington off the board. We saw Jacoby Brissett come into the game last week for Washington, and he put up as many yards as Howell did in 2 drives. So I wouldn't be surprising to me if Howell's on a short leash this week, and they might even turn towards Brissett if he gets stopped in the first couple of drives. So I think I'm going to be fading Howell in all my lineups this week.
I do give Ron Rivera credit for sticking with Howell though, because it's a lost season. You want to see what he has, and I'm glad he's probably fighting for his job. He's probably not going to have his job after this year. Let's be honest. But
Yeah, Ron
sometimes
Rivera's
when you're doing that, you're going to go with the guy that can get you the win. But I give him credit for at least sticking with Howell. Let's see if he can rebound. He's played well at times, but I agree. I would be scared to use him this week for sure. So I'll mention a quarterback as well that I'm scared of this week and I'm fading. It's Jordan Love. He's really had a good season, kind of like Howell. He's actually 9th overall in fantasy quarterback scoring, which is a little surprising. So he's top 10 right now, but he's stumbled a little bit lately. He has 3 turnovers his last 2 games. He failed to even hit 14 fantasy points in week 14 a couple weeks ago, and he faces Carolina, who they really struggle against the run. So I love Aaron Jones. I think he's going to get a ton of work, but Carolina's good against the pass. They're 3rd overall against the pass. They allow just 173.7 passing yards per game. Teams can run on them, so they're going to focus on running the ball, I think, this week, take some pressure off Love, and I think they're going to run the ball a lot. So I do not like Love a lot in that matchup. All right, another question there, Logan. Bench one out of Jerome Ford, Jalen Warren, or Austin Eckler. Man, you would have never thought Eckler would be in that conversation, but I think it's legit that he is in there to
Yeah,
bench.
it's wild to
He's
think
not been
about,
good.
but I actually think I might be benching Eckler out of that just with the Chargers offense. They just look like they cannot move the ball. That was even with Justin Herbert at quarterback, and now without him gone. We saw last week with that. So I think I'm benching Eckler, which is wild to say out of those. But
Yeah, I,
what are your
I
thoughts?
I think I'm going Warren. It is close, but I think I like Warren a little less. He has less than double-digit fantasy points 3 or 4 games. They're starting Mason Rudolph. I know the Bengals aren't very good, but I think Warren's a guy I'd bench. So I'm going to give Eckler one more shot. I just think he has a higher ceiling than Warren at this point. So I probably go Eckler and Ford there and bench Warren. All right, let's do another fade, Logan. Who's another guy you're looking to bench this week?
Yeah, next one is probably going to be in a lot of lineups, but I'm going to be fading him, and that's Jordan Addison. Last week, he had 29 fantasy points. He had 111 yards, 2 touchdowns. Before that game, though, he really struggled, and I think he was on the bench on a lot of teams last week, especially with Justin Jefferson coming back. Before that, he had 10, 10, 7, 9, 4. And then he had that explosion game last week for 29. So he was really struggled ever since Kirk Cousins went down. Just hasn't really gelled with the backup quarterbacks with either Dobbs or. But last week he bounced back with Mullins. But I think Justin Jefferson, with him being there, just looking towards Jefferson right away. But I'm going to be fading Addison just as that number 2 option. I do think they struggle a little bit against Detroit with that. So I'm going to be fading Addison.
All right. My next fade is James Conner with Arizona Cardinals. He actually played pretty well since returning from his injury in week 10. He has 2 straight games with 17 plus fantasy points, but he did have 3 straight games without hitting 9 fantasy points before his last 2 games. So it hasn't been all rosy for Conner this year. I think he's capable of the low game. And they play Chicago this week, who's actually been playing much better defensively. They're 1st overall against a run, 79.8 rushing yards per game that they allow. So I think this offense could struggle a little bit this week outside of throwing the ball. I think the running game is going to struggle. I think Kyler Murray might have to run more than anybody for them this week. Like I mentioned earlier, I like McBride a lot. I think they're going to have to throw it to beat this defense. So I don't think Connor's going to have a great week this week. All right, let's do another question, Logan. Actually, I just wanted to look at a comment here, but Bryce mentioned my opponent is stacked, so I got to go for it all. But I agree with that in the playoffs. You can't play it safe. I think it's a great point that he makes. I mean, just playing it safe at this time of year will get you losses. It's not like you just want to get wins. So you get in the playoffs. You're in the playoffs. Anything can happen. The best teams don't always win, unfortunately, if you have a great team. I mean, look at people with Tyreek Hill. They may have been knocked out in the first round of the playoffs last week because he was hurt. So crazy things can happen. Just go for it. If you go for those high ceiling players in these matchups, I think it's a great point that he makes. All right, Logan, let's look at another question on here. Jonathan has a question. Running back situation's bad right now. Have to start 3 between Saquon Barkley, Kenneth Walker, Singletary, and Ty Chandler. I actually don't think those options are bad for him.
Yeah, I actually think those are actually 4
Yeah,
decent options, especially for this week. Maybe before, like, the season started, Singletary and Chandler wouldn't look as great options, but right now,
exactly.
they are actually might be top 20 running back options.
Yeah, so you got to bench one of those guys. What do you think?
Yeah, so I think I'm gonna be benching Ty Chandler, and it hurts me to say that just because of how explosive he looked. He looked so good last week with that. Madison is still kind of up in the air if he will be playing this week, but I just think there's too much talent there to bench Barkley or Walker. And Singletary has a pretty good matchup at home against Cleveland with that. And Singletary's been getting so much work in that backfield. He definitely has that number one um, option in Houston on control with that, and he also has the goal line work as well with that offense. So I think I'm going to be starting him over Chandler.
I love the volume of Singletary, which helps his floor, but again, it's the playoffs. I might take a chance on Chandler again over
Yeah,
Singletary. I might differentiate from you a little bit. I think it's a toss up between those guys, though. That's the way I would lean, either Singletary or Chandler. So I might go with Chandler. I just think his ceiling might be a little higher. I like his matchup more. Cleveland's pretty good rush defense. They've been a little more leaky against the run lately, but still got a pretty good defense overall. Case Keenum starting, so that scares me a little bit as well. So I probably lean Chandler. Again, I think he carries some risk just because he's a little bit of an unknown, even after last week. But they mentioned the coach mentioned that they want to use him even if Madison's healthy. So it
yeah.
seems like he may have taken over that starting job,
He
which is
looked
good.
really good. He
He
looked
did.
really good when plugged in there. So
Explosive for sure. All right, Logan, let's do another one of our fades for this week. Is it our last one?
yes, final fade with
Final
that.
fade. Who's your final fade for the week?
Yeah, final fade is going to be Adam Thielen. So Thielen got off to a really hot start, but he is just fallen off of that. He's still top 15 wide receiver overall, but that's mainly just because of how many points he had through the first 8 weeks with that. But recently he's gone 1, 5, 12, and 8 in his last 4 games. He's still getting a couple of targets per game, looks around 6 or 7 per game. But he's just not the guy that he was to start the season. I don't know if that's with age. The offense is just really struggling overall with that. So I'm going to be fading Thielen this week. It's just hard for me to put him in a lineup if I've got other options that I
He
see.
he definitely looks like he's slowing down, just not getting much separation, I hate to say it, and that offensive line's not good. I think that, the rookie QB, Bryce Young, struggled as well, so a lot of things going against him right now, unfortunately, so I agree with you there. I don't like Thielen much in week 16. My last fade's another running back. It's Javonte Williams. So he ran 12 times for just 27 yards last week. He has fewer than 70 rushing yards 5 straight games. So he gets some volume. A lot of weeks he catches the ball as well, but he just hasn't done a whole lot for fantasy teams lately. Again, his floor is decent, but I just don't think his ceiling is very high right now. And he plays New England, who's actually second against the run. They allow just 84.9 rushing yards per game. And while New England's kind of a mess overall as a team, that defense has played well lately. So I'm a little intrigued, not too intrigued by Williams, I should say. I think they might have to throw the ball more. I like Cortland Sutton. He's been finding the end zone. And I actually think uh, Russell Wilson could have a decent game as well. So I'm fading Javonte Williams for this week. All right, we got a few more questions rolling in before we get out of here, Logan. And the next one, start Tua, Kyler, or Stafford. So those are three really similar options for Tyson here. I think he has a tough decision. I'll go first this time. Logan, I say I lean Tua in a game that should be high scoring. I think Tyreek Hill is going to do everything he can to play as well this week. So I would expect him to probably come back this week, which is great news for Tua. So I probably lean him. I just think he has a high ceiling. I think Stafford's a really safe play too. I think he could do well tonight. He's been really consistent lately, 4 straight games with 20 plus fantasy points. But I just think that Tua probably has a little higher ceiling. Stafford might be the safer of the three options, but I like Tua. How about you?
Yep, I'm the exact same way there. I don't think I'm starting Kyler out of those 3. I think he's my 3rd option with that. If we got news that Tyreek Hill wasn't playing, I think I would go Stafford. But like as you mentioned, I think Hill does play. He was questionable up until game time last week. It kind of a little bit surprised me that he was inactive just because he's pushing towards that 2,000 yards, but they got to look at the bigger picture there with Miami and not just worry about his yardage there. But I do think he's going to be back playing this week. So I would go Tua.
And Ryan has a tough tight end question here. Taysom Hill tonight, Chiga Conku or Tanner Hudson? And then he put Gross, which I kind of agree with, unfortunately, uh, there for you,
Yeah, I
Ryan.
think I'm going to go Taysom Hill on this, actually. We saw in a couple of weeks before he got hurt how good he can be for fantasy purposes, getting rushes inside the 5-yard line. He's been used as a tight end, getting lots of receptions with that, and then occasionally have a couple of throws here and there. So I think I'm going to start Taysom Hill with that just because of his upside.
I think I'm the same way. I probably lean Taysom, even though he had just 2 touches last week, but I think his chance for the big game is bigger than any of those guys. Like Chikakonkwo, he's been fine. Like he has at least 3 catches, 4 straight games, and he has at least 3 catches like every game this season, but he hasn't even hit double-digit fantasy points in any game. So I just don't think that ceiling's very high for him. I think Hill's a guy that could go off and is the more exciting of those 3 plays. So I might give him a shot there. And then we have a defense question. Which defense do you like better this week, Packers or Bears?
Yeah, I think I'm Packers. They're playing against Carolina. Bryce Young struggles with the turnovers with that. He's got several pick sixes on the season. So that gets you lots of fantasy points if one of those happens. So I'm going to go Packers on that.
Yeah, I like the Packers too. I have them ranked 6 this week, Bears 9. So 2 top 10 options. I think they're both good plays this week. Bears have been playing better defensively. They've showed me a lot in recent weeks. They play Arizona's kind of beat up at receiver. And I don't think they'll be able to run the ball very well, but I still like the Packers against Carolina. They're just a disaster like right now, Carolina offensively. All right, one more question. Tyson has one more for us. Dynasty Superflex. Normally I go with the QB all the time, but it's Bailey Zappi for his option here. And then he has Gettert and Godwin. You
Yeah.
still go QB here? I mean,
So I would for sure go QB here, but the weather kind of concerns me a little bit on that game. It is supposed to be a snow game at
oh, I didn't
Denver. I
know
think
that.
it's going to be our first snow game of the season, is based on weather reports right now. So if it looks really bad, then I would pivot off of Zappy. But if it looks like they're going to be able won't have too much effect, then I think I would go with the QB there.
Yeah, as much as I don't like Zappy normally, I mean, still, even if he has a terrible game, he could get you 15 fantasy points or 12 to 15 fantasy points. I think
Yeah,
Godwin is exciting uh, this week. After last week, he's been playing better. I like their matchup, but still, it's tough for me to go with a receiver over a QB, even if it's Bailey Zappi. But
yeah, his last
I
2
lean
games
that way.
that he started, he had 24 fantasy points and then 12. So even
I
if he
mean,
goes with that lower end with 12, it's
it's still not terrible.
that's
Yeah.
not terrible. I feel like that's an average game for Goddard and Godwin. But then you got that upside that he had 24 points against Pittsburgh the week before that. So
Yeah, but
again, I
you're
think it
right.
comes down to weather for it.
Yeah, keep an eye on that weather. I agree with Logan. I probably lean Zappy. I like that the floor when the quarterback's in there more so than the other options. I mean, Gettert, he kind of scares me at this point. He's so hit or miss in that offense. It's just tough to trust him. He's one of these guys I'm going to end up being more of a best ball option for me going forward. I hate to say it because it's hard for
Yeah.
me to trust him.
Yep.
All right, Logan, that's all of our fades and favorite plays for this week. As we mentioned earlier, our Super Shootout Christmas edition is open now. Go to rtsports.com. If you want to see who Logan and I pick, go to rtsports.com/Christmas. All of our Super Shootout picks are on there. You can sign up from the contest from that page as well. Again, quick and easy game, 8 players, 1 QB, 2 running backs, 3 receivers, tight ends, a defense, and a kicker. And you pick that, and you cannot pick more than 2 players from any team. Just a great contest, just $10 to enter for a chance to win $1,000. Pays out 30 spots as well. And as soon as it sells out, it sells out. It just keeps creeping up as well. So it's getting closer to being sold out every minute. So if you want to get in that, do it sooner than later. You can get to it from the league homepages too, on all your homepages, to sign up for that contest. And Logan, how many spots is it again? Do you know off the top of your head? Not to put you on the spot.
550 total entries in that
Okay,
contest.
550. Yep. So 550 entries, just $10 to get in. We pay out $1,000 of the grand prize. So great contest. It'll make Christmas even better this year when you're watching that and keeping track of all your games. So good luck to everybody out there this weekend. Again, we have games Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. You got games Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, some on Saturday as well. So it's a full weekend of games. Should be a lot of fun. I hope everybody has a great holiday as well. You too, Logan. Should be a
Appreciate it.
lot
You
of
too,
fun.
Jeff.
Yeah. Safe travels if you have to travel anywhere. Everybody out there. Hopefully the weather is good in your neck of the woods. Looks like it's going to be pretty good for the most part, except for Colorado. I saw that. Maybe some rain up east again, but for the most part, it seems kind of unseasonably warm. It's supposed to be 60 degrees here in St. Louis tomorrow and the weekend, I
Yeah,
think,
it
which is
does not feel
crazy.
like Christmas weather here.
Does
That's for
not.
sure.
I got to go. I'm going to go put shorts on and blow my leaves out in the front yard. So who'd have thought that in December? But that's on my agenda for later on today. So again, good luck to everybody out there in your games. We appreciate you tuning in. It's been a lot of fun throughout the season. We have another show next week as well, getting you ready for your championship games. So hopefully everybody out there wins your games, get to those championships. Should be a great week of action. Thanks again for Logan joining me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. Good luck, everybody out there in your games. Have a great Christmas and looking forward to the action this weekend. This has been Jeff Power with Real Time Fantasy Sports. Have a great day.